Hello and welcome back, everyone, to this month's Insight Jam. Exit warning: why enterprises are abandoning the public cloud. Abandoning the public cloud, oh my God, how could that possibly be? Hasn't cloud computing, been heralded as the panacea of all modern IT challenges? I mean, it offers scalability and flexibility, cost savings, and an easy on-ramp to all the latest technologies. Sounds pretty darn great, if you ask me. So why not stick with it? Well, it turns out that the cloud landscape as it's matured, is many organizations are finding the reality of cloud adoption doesn't necessarily always align with their expectations. So Joni Mitchell had a great song in the 60s, Both Sides Now, where I've looked at clouds at both sides now. And I think as companies are doing that, they're starting to see pros and cons and adjusting their strategy accordingly. According to IDC, they had a recent blog called Storm Clouds Ahead, Missed Expectations in Cloud Computing. And they listed some of the challenges: cost management, performance optimization, security and compliance, operational control, a lot of factors going into that. We'll explore those today in a more in-depth basis, because those might be factors impacting your organization and things that might have you consider repatriating some of the workloads to the cloud, or maybe taking new workloads, keeping new workloads on premises to begin with. But we'll figure that out and we'll explore that together. But today we're going to really delve into what you should do about cloud repatriation and some of the reasons behind these mixed expectations and why some businesses are choosing to bring their cloud workloads back home. And to help you with that, we've got three guests, really great folks. Philip Russum, who's an independent analyst in data management and analytics, and longtime analyst, just about every firm you can name. I guess not at IDC. That would be maybe a work from the null set here. Brian Adler, who's a senior director for cloud market strategy, and also a former Gartner analyst who focused on cloud. And then Pavan Najudaya, who's over at Tredence, and he's in charge of studio innovation. So a lot of their advanced technology innovation work with the clients. So why don't we we'll spend a little bit, you guys can introduce yourselves, your company, your role at the firm, and then we'll dive in. Why don't we start with you, Brian?
Okay, great. Thank you, Bob. And again, thank you very much for letting us talk to you and to your audience as well. I'm Brian Adler, Senior Director of Cloud Market Strategy. Fancy way of saying I try to act as a sort of cloud subject matter expert, both internally within our organization and then also with our customers and prospects. Flexera started, decades ago, and obviously there was no such thing as cloud. So the whole SaaS thing and the cloud thing was new. I always say it's day one in the cloud for everybody at some point, right? So I've kind of come along and try to help customers, prospects, and then even internal education there as well. Prior to coming to Flexera, well, back in the day, back in 2008, 2009, actually, I started a company called RightScale, which was one of the first cloud management platforms. So we were talking to folks about migrating workloads to the cloud way back then. And then I went over to Gartner, and Philip and I just found out that we didn't cross paths, but we crossed timing. We were there at the same time back in 2021-ish kind of thing. And as you said, Bob, I focus mostly on cloud, things like cloud strategy, best practices, reference architectures. And then eventually, all of our discussions eventually came to cloud cost management, which is probably going to come into our discussion today about repatriation as well. So then Flexera acquired RightScale. So I'm back with some of my old cronies, if you will. So I kind of came back. So it's been good to come back into the fold and see some of those folks as well. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, and how the world of technology is such a small world. Pavan, tell us about you and what you do at Tredence.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for having me. Good morning. Good afternoon, folks. My name is Pavan Najudaya. I head the Tredence Studio Innovations team. Tredence is in the space of data science, AI consulting. We are headquartered in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm calling in from Bangalore, India. So at Tredence, my responsibilities are to build solutions basically in the space of AI What we do is we identify a bunch of different domain problems like supply chain, customer analytics, etc. And then we build various kinds of solutions. Data engineering and AI and data science, machine learning would be a common theme in what we do. But a lot of work involves moving heavy data loads from on-prem to cloud, cloud to on-prem, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, etc. A lot of work also involves building full-stack web applications. So fairly experienced in the space of operating different kinds of infrastructure across different cloud systems. But ultimately, the net of whatever we do, the goal is to drive and deliver value for customers. So it's not technology for the sake of technology. It's basically technology which creates real business value for our customers.
And a lot of rolling up your sleeves and helping make those happen.
Exactly.
Great. Philip, good to see you. Give us an update.
Hey, good to see you too also, Bob. Yeah, my name is Philip Russum. And, I've been in and out of IT for 49 years, almost 50. So this year I'll celebrate 50 years in IT. And almost 30 years of that was specifically in data management. Most of that was in data warehousing. And in fact, I worked for the Data Warehousing Institute for 15 years. That's the world's largest provider of training for people who want to get into data warehousing, but also fields that relate to that, like data integration, master data management, data quality, or if you want to go a different route, people who want to get into being a data scientist or some sort of other data analyst. And so, yeah, like Bob mentioned earlier, I've worked for most of the leading analyst firms. So Hurwitz Group, Giga Information Group, Gartner, Forrester, and I did retire in 2022, but the first thing I did when retiring was start two small businesses. So one business is my work as a singing pianist, and in fact that business is going really well. So I'm getting a lot of gigs, and I play a lot of private parties as well as restaurants and cafes and stuff. But the other small business is as an independent industry analyst. And a lot of the work that I'm doing with my user clients is to help them with different variations of data architectures. And for many of them, they can handle work with very specific solutions and with the data management that has to go with those, but they have some trouble getting the big picture together. In other words, if we're going to grow into maturity, we're going to have hundreds of different analytic applications. We're going to have dozens of tools being used by very large teams. I do tend to work with mid-sized to large companies on these architecture issues. And so as you look at most architectures for data management and analytics, these are inherently multi-platform. So multiple database, different types of database management systems from many different vendors. There's every ETL and data integration tool in the book. And then, of course, traditional stuff like reporting, dashboards, self-service BI, that's still with us because that's what a lot of business users need from analytics. And of course, in recent years, we've all seen the explosion where artificial intelligence crossed the line from predictive into generative, and a lot of exciting stuff going on there. But for most of the organizations I'm dealing with, even though they are mature and very sophisticated, it's still kind of early days for generative AI. But they've been doing predictive analytics through AI and machine learning for many years. So it's a very exciting time. I'm so happy to work with these sophisticated users that I know and helping them to construct very large architectures for a highly diverse group of analytic solutions that they have to build and support.
Great. Wow. Sounds like you're keeping very busy, Philip. Quite a retirement. Well, let's dig in. There's some key questions, the who, what, when, where, why of repatriation. So let's kind of explore that. So first of all, is this repatriation trend real, Or is cloud growth just simply slowing down? Kind of the second derivative kind of factor here. So why don't we start with you, Brian? What do you think about that? What are you seeing as you guys are out with your clients?
Yeah, sure. So I would say if you had asked me to join this, a year ago, if we done this discussion a year ago, I would have been the cynic in the room about repatriation, right? But I'm really starting it's starting to become a thing, like we said earlier when we started, is that if you've heard of Flexera for one reason, folks, you might have heard of our State of the Cloud report, which is now in its 13th year or something like that. And we've never really asked repatriation questions in the past. This is the first year that we did ask them. And I was surprised. And if you're watching this prior to March 19th, 2025, you're getting a sneak peek. I'm telling you some stuff that I'm not supposed to tell you, but about 20%, roughly 20% exactly, of folks had said that they're both repatriating some workloads and repatriating some of their data as well. And back in the day when I worked over at Gartner, when Philip and I were there at the same time, is that I had a lot of folks coming to me and ask me about repatriation, and they would say, "Oh, look, I got this report that my CTO or CIO had pointed me to," and I'd look at it. And it was sponsored or commissioned by a company who had a dog in the fight, right? A company that sold on-prem gear or whatever. So I was always like, I'm hearing a lot about this, but I'm not really seeing it. That has started to change over the last few years, and I am definitely starting to see. Like I said, we asked that question for the first time this year. We ask questions year over year to look for trends. This is definitely a question we'll keep in the report as we go forward to kind of see where we're going. But I'd say that yes, it's a thing. It's not a huge thing, but it is a thing. And 5 years ago, I would have said it was not.
Great. Philip, in these complex architectures, and you've seen the evolution. I mean, you were on the vanguard of cloud databases and the like. Are you seeing this repatriation trend as something real, or just a kind of a slowing of growth relative, or what are you seeing?
Short answer is yes, I've seen it. Yes, it's real, depending on what you think repatriation is. There's also some irony to it, kind of like what Brian was saying. For years, when I worked for analyst firms, I would also do a fair amount of consulting as an analyst, and sometimes, stick my nose into solutions design. I didn't do implementations, of course. Somebody else did it. But anyway, a common consulting job was for me to go in and help people organize a migration. So a migration from A to B. And, for years, I helped people with a lot of migrations from, vendor number one's database management system to vendor number two's database management system. And then, of course, over time, as cloud became very prominent, a lot of the migrations were migrating large data sets. Remember, I've spent a lot of time in data warehousing. So I worked on a lot of teams just getting their act together, planning a migration scheme for a mature warehouse to take it to a cloud. And so this repatriation, to me, there's a kind of irony to it, because it's kind of a reverse repatriation that I was doing for years through migrations. But I have to say, so where am I seeing things that are truly repatriation or just look like it? Remember earlier I talked about a lot of my users have large multi-platform architectures. And just part of the nature of a multi-platform architecture is data's going to move. Data's going to move from system to system as part of a refinement process. Raw data comes into your system. It goes through the precious metals of bronze, silver, gold states of data. So data is going to move in that sense, but also just as people understand what workloads need some tweaking, and yes, even on cloud, workloads still need tweaking, right? The scalability, the elasticity of cloud promised to maybe help us do less tweaking, but there's still some tweaking out there. And then, of course, a lot of analytic projects come and go. That's the nature of data science. So you got multiple platforms, you got data science projects that ramp up, achieve a result, and then sort of fade away, and the data scientists go work on something else. So because of that, we're constantly moving data around and tweaking it and making changes. And as part of that, people decide, you know what, because of the weird nature of this crazy kind of analytic queries we're doing, or this kind of machine learning that we're starting doing that's different from machine learning processing when we're doing in the place, sometimes they realize, sometimes the on-premises platform is actually a real good fit, from a performance viewpoint and for tweaking the different kinds of processing and queries that are just such a huge part of any data and analytics workloading. Now there are other issues later, but I'm going to stop at this point. At some point, I can talk about how a lot of the drivers end up being about cost, not performance and workload.
Well, that's always the topic that everybody's concerned about. We will circle back to that. Pavan, as you say, you guys work on solutions, and that requires, as Philip talked about, data and workloads and the movement of data and workloads. And you even mentioned that you do a lot of migrations to get things into the cloud or get things into these new solutions. Are you seeing, what are you guys seeing as in this front? Is it you're still doing those migrations, but are you doing some bringing stuff back on-prem? And if so, when are you seeing those cases?
Yeah, for sure. I agree with the panel. I think the repatriation topic is kind of becoming a lot mainstream in the sense that it's coming up now. I'll give you some examples. We're working with a large media company in the Middle Eastern region. So when, let's rewind, let's say about 5-10 years back, where everybody wanted to move to the cloud because, ease of use, you can bring up clusters, whatnot. But then slowly people, I think, are realizing that not all of your data has to sit in cloud because there is an egress cost when you're actually hitting your databases and querying data out of it. As your data volume increases, even though storage is cheap, with time, it just bubbles up when the nature of the business is such that you're dealing with large volumes of data. Being a media company, we're talking about a lot of videos, images, so on and so forth. Now, with a lot of AI use cases getting unlocked, unstructured data is becoming so much more accessible. And hence, what we're seeing is the nature of the use cases these days are such that customers are actually thinking about their strategy in terms of cost, in terms of data security, etc. And all these things are helping them to connect the dots. And actually, repatriation, almost to a hybrid cloud of sorts, is actually coming up very often these days, right? And when I talk about repatriation, think of scenarios where customers have moved from traditional on-prem to cloud. We are now talking about bringing some workloads back to on-prem and figuring out what does that hybrid strategy look like. Not all use cases come in the same shape and size, and hence you don't need the same strategy for all. Right. So now customers we're seeing are asking us very intelligent questions as to what will be the workloads or what could be the cost 2 years from now, 5 years from now. And when you're thinking ahead of time, you're really thinking about a bunch of different things, right? So it's not just about taking your analytical solution and its workload to the cloud, understanding what is the impact of the upstream. Say if it's an ERP system which is giving you transactional data and then you're doing some analytics on top of it. Is it just sufficient if you take your analytical workloads to cloud? How will that really talk to your transaction data, which is probably still sitting on-prem? So these are some real discussions that are coming on the table, right? So absolutely, repatriation is coming up in our discussions too.
So in a nutshell, what we're talking about is being intelligent about your architecture, intelligent about your use case, not just defaulting if architecture or if use case, then cloud for everything. It's like applying some real thoughtfulness to your strategy.
Yeah, Bob, if I could jump in there real quick, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please, Brian.
I love what Pavan was saying there. It's sort of like I'm sitting here nodding, going, and I don't know if you did the same thing, Philip, but back when I was in the Gartner days, anytime anyone asked a question, the answer always was, well, it depends, right? And what does it depend on? All those things you just listed, right? So there's no perfect answer. It's great that they're asking the intelligent questions and you're going to come to the right solution as a result of that. But it depends is the answer. And let's dig into what it depends on and to figure that out. Yeah.
Great. Well, let's jump into the second question. I want to kind of do this round robin just really, just kind of focusing on the factors that are driving this repatriation. Maybe each of you guys could take one and we'll just keep going until we run out of good ideas. Brian, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bob.
No, please go ahead.
I was going to say, I said at the onset when I did the intro, I always end up talking about costs, right? So I'm going to talk about costs. I'll start with that one, right? So, back in the day when I had many, and I'm sorry, I keep going back to the Gartner days, but that's when I had the most interactions with the most wide, diverse audience. and then say, hey, my CTO or CIO says, we're not buying another server, we need to get in the cloud. And I've got 6 months, right? The clock is ticking. So what everyone did was, remember the 5 R's? Well, the first one was, just rehost, throw it, lift and shift, throw it over the fence. And that's what everyone did. And I could guarantee you when you did that, you were not performance optimized and absolutely not cost optimized, right? And you always said, oh, I'll get back to it, right? I'll get back to it and I'll fix it. And other things happen and other priorities come up and you don't get back to it. And that ends out being not just like I said, not just underperforming or could perform better, but it's going to be more costly. And then folks start to look at these things going, well, that was cheaper to run on-prem. Well, you didn't refactor, you didn't re-platform it, you didn't use the PaaS services that were available to make that thing more resilient and cheaper. And as a result, you're going to go ahead and pull that back. And the other example that I use, and Pavan was kind of touched on, he reminded me of it, is we've had customers that have started in the cloud and they're generating a ton of data. And I always called it like the frog in the pot of water, right? They're out there and, hey, this is pretty cheap all as well. And then the data builds up and builds up and builds up and their bills keep going like, oh my gosh, right? I'm having, it's a penalty of my own success. I'm doing so well and generating so much more data. It's costing me so much more. Well, I've got all this storage volumes available on-prem. Maybe I should pull that back, right? So the cost aspect is definitely a big factor there. And I'll finish with just saying, folks used to always ask me, hey, is cloud cheaper? And I'd say generally yes, but not initially. You got to do it right. It takes time. It takes iteration. And if you don't have those time and those resources and those cycles, it's probably not going to be cheaper for you. And you have to make these tough decisions.
Great. So Philip, do you want to double down on cost or do you want to pick something else?
Well, I think Brian touched a lot of the nerves that I've been touching for years. So, like replatforming data, rehosting, I think is the term you use, Brian. And yeah, just because and I mentioned earlier, if you got a multi-platform environment, data is going to move and get rehosted from platform to platform. And don't forget, with a lot of my customers, they have multiple clouds. And so, so this rehosting issue without proper, refactoring of the data happens a lot. For example, a common architecture that I find a lot of my clients in is that there's always some kind of data lake, and it's big, and it's diverse, but it's usually on AWS, right? So S3 continues to be the preferred data lake platform, even though there are other platforms that seem to have a lot more functionality. But even though the lake is there on AWS, they may be using Databricks and Snowflake on Azure. And if you got a data science team, a lot of data scientists they're very passionate about Google, right? So they want to do their data science on Google. So you're inherently rehosting data across multiple clouds. So that's a big issue that people forget, and they just kind of wonder, well, why aren't things running optimally? Well, it's because even though these seem to be similar platforms, and even though the object store down at the gut level of storage is kind of the same, they're not actually the same. Also, there's this myth that if I throw a lot of data on cloud, then the elastic nature of cloud will auto-magically correct any performance problems I've got. No, it don't get me wrong, elasticity helps enormously, and we're lucky to have it. But we still need tools that have tweaking to get the performance once you rehost. And that's one of the things I'm seeing missing. I also want to cut some vendors slack because many of them are very young, very new, and it takes time to build up the rich, feature functionality of Oracle or Teradata, right? Those guys have been working on that for 30 years. So that, a vendor company that's less than 10, yeah, they're kind of weak on some functionality, and just query optimization, query planning functionality, and anything that helps you with the optimization for that does tend to be weaker on cloud-based tools than it is on the more mature on-premises tools.
Okay, Pavan, how about you? Thanks, Philip. Pavan, what do you think?
Yes, so I think Brian and Philip touched on a lot of important points. I'll probably talk about something that didn't get covered so far, right? What we're also seeing is data security and privacy is, again, an important criteria, especially for our banking and financial customers. It is so important to maintain the privacy and the security of this data that a lot of times customers feel that if the data is repatriated, hosted in their on-prem, which is basically governed by their InfoSec policies, they feel much more secure, much more safer managing the data. So that comes up in some of our discussions. Data sovereignty has come up in a couple of our discussions, where in which geolocation do you want to host your data, right? And then again, when we get into the Europe and the Middle Eastern space, these become very specific, very picky topics. So I would say, along with what Brian and Philip were saying, the 2-3 things that I just called out are probably good reasons for customers to consider.
Great. So far we've touched, I think, all four of the IDC: cost management, performance optimization, security compliance, sovereignty. And then they had a fourth one, operational control. I think you touched on that a little bit, Philip, because talked about the tool capabilities of operational control, but also just this complexity, trying to control complexity and maybe how you reduce complexity. Brian, do you have any thoughts on this operational control aspect?
Yeah, and this is sort of even from personal experience as well. Like many of the clients, again, going back a little bit, many of the clients I spoke to was like, hey, we're all in on AWS or we're all in on Azure. We don't need to worry about all these vendor tools. We want to use the native tools are all working for us. And I said, that very well may be the case, but I'll use Flexair as an example. I won't mention the clouds and all this kind of stuff, but we've done a lot of acquisitions over the years, right? So we used to be a single cloud company. We're now in all three of the big ones because we've acquired companies that were in these other cloud environments as well. And our guys got really good at the tools for Cloud A, and now all of a sudden we've got Cloud B, and now we've got Cloud C. All right, so you either have to find some tool to abstract them all, one tool to rule them all, which doesn't exist. You have to build it your own, or you have to have folks that are versed, or different teams that are versed in all these different tools. So that operational control is definitely the burden, I call it the operational burden associated with managing a multi-cloud environment, can be very complex. And that's another reason it might be attractive to say, hey, what if we pull this back in and we use the tool set that we've always used and that all our guys and girls know, and maybe that's there's some shine to that, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, thank you. That actually, I think, leads us to the next question: is what do you decide to repatriate? And what you're saying, for example, repatriate something that has so much complexity. Philip, what do you see when people what is it that's driving them to repatriate?
Bob, I'm sorry, but I'm going to backtrack.
Okay.
Because I need to add something onto what Brian was saying.
Please.
Something that I was in the database cohort at Gartner, and something all of us have been calling for years is greater financial governance for just about any kind of system you put on cloud, and this is especially the case with data and analytics systems. In another trend, remember earlier I talked about how the elasticity of cloud does reduce some of the administrative work that a job like the database administrator is doing. And a lot of people ask me, so do we even need database administrators anymore? So if you bring those two trends together, something I've been recommending, and some of my clients have done this, so I know it works, is keep your DBA as you go to cloud, but adjust the kind of work your DBA. It is true, your DBA will have less tweaking and stuff like that, less monitoring to do on cloud. However, there's new stuff that needs to be done on cloud. And one is to monitor for cost of database management systems and analytics tools that are accessing that data. And I tell you, a lot of people are seduced by cost on the, and here I can sort of segue into your new question, Bob. So financial governance, quite often handled by the DBA to look at the financial cost of data. That is a best practice. That's also part of your team structure. So as you move to cloud, you're not just refactoring data. You typically need to reorganize and refactor your teams as well. So rethink the DBA person to do a lot of this financial governance. There really needs to be done before you can even figure out what that blasted cloud is costing you. Another quickie here, a lot of people get seduced by the cheap price of storage on cloud. And then later, once they get on there and they start, cranking up their workloads and bringing more workloads online, they realize, oh, the real cost is in the workloads, not the storage, right? So your DBA is not just monitoring storage; they're also monitoring kind of, how much CPU resource consumption based for analytic workloads. See what I'm saying? So again, don't be seduced. Storage is cheap, compute is not. So I'll stop right there, Bob. I'm sorry to derail it, but these are kind of
that's fine. These are factors driving cloud repatriation now.
Yep.
And so, I think it's nice. Both you and Brian talked on the people aspect. That has to also be considered going to the cloud or coming back. And then Pavan, you guys provide, extra people resource. That's part of the core business. But when your clients, how are they deciding what to repatriate? You mentioned the case of the media company. That was a factor. What other where the type of use case was driving it? Is it usually use case driven? Give us another example if you have one.
Yeah, for sure. See, typically what we do is we do some kind of workflow audits, right? We understand what kind of workloads are you doing? What is the real cost? What is the real pain point, right? So we talk about what will be your large projects, say in the next 1 to 3 years or so, right? Depending on whatever is the vision and the visibility that the company has. Because what this does is helps us to sit with the customer and come up with a holistic plan. When we talk about a holistic plan, the plan basically not just talks about infrastructure, which is certain workloads will be moved to, let's say, an on-prem, and hence what kind of infrastructure are we talking about? Is this scalable? We are also talking about what kind of skilled man force do you need? So when you move to cloud, the understanding is that I can run whatever I want. A lot of that would be serverless, and hence it will be taken care for me. But then when you're bringing that workload back to on-prem, you got to understand you have to have the right DevOps, you've got to have the right database administrators, you got to have the right testing strategies, etc. So one of the primary things that our customers ask us, and we kind of, as part of the auditing process, we go through and do that, is identify the key strategic projects and what does it take to move those workloads. And when we talk about workloads, it's not just about as of today, you've got few petabytes of data, and here are certain servers, etc., that have to be moved. But what is the real impact when you talk about end-to-end strategic initiatives that you want to drive? If a customer is thinking of upgrading their ERP system in the next 2 years, what does that really mean, right? If you're planning to invest in, let's say, a large data warehouse migration project, what does that really mean? So we kind of take a step back, assess the larger lay of the land, and then give our recommendation, right? And it'll be covering some of the topics that I just called out.
So again, basically, I like this idea of a workload audit and a look forward to create that holistic plan that includes what are the loads, what are the storage needs, what are the people requirements, what are the control systems, that all of that needs to come together looking forward. And if, as you look forward, you may decide to repatriate something, or you may decide to move something from one cloud to another cloud, et cetera. So it's not so reactionary, it's more driven by a strategy, or in Philip's case, an architecture driven by a strategy. Great. Brian, any thoughts on how you decide what to repatriate?
Yeah, well, I'm going to go back to my de facto answer, right? It depends, right? But what does it depend on, right? So what I've seen as far as the workloads that I've seen personally, if you will, through working with clients and prospects, the workloads that have been repatriated are the ones going back to those 5 R's, the ones that were rehosted, the ones that were just thrown over the fence to just because I had to, right? I got it over there and I didn't spend the time to performance tune it. I didn't spend the time to optimize the costs. It's just over there, and my bosses are telling me, hey, that thing's costing, I know that's costing more than it cost here on-prem. We've got the space, we've got the time, let's bring this thing back over. So that's historically what I've been seeing. The other ones is around performance, right? Sometimes, the cloud promises, like Philip was talking about, this infinite scalability and flexibility, and that's all well and good. But if you've got very strict, latency requirements and things like that. I've had a client, this is many years ago, but did the AWS dedicated host concept, right? So everything was running on one physical box. They wanted the absolute, get rid of they're all on the same backplane. There's no network traversing and all this kind of stuff. And they said, well, that's no different than me doing it in my on-prem. I've got a big old honking piece of hardware here, right? So those are sort of the most common ones that I've seen thus far.
So rationalize the rehosted, re-rationalize, or repair. Maybe that's the other R, repair or recover.
Recover from what I did. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then performance. Anything else is you just, well, let's transition now from, we've talked about why, and what are some of the drivers, and what's bringing things back. Let's get practical. How do you actually do it? What's it take? What are the steps? Is there a formula? What are some of the best practices in doing that? Lessons learned, that sort of thing. Pavan, let's start with you on that one. What does it take to repatriate an application or a workload?
Yeah, for sure. Say, one of the first things that I usually recommend to my customers is, let's say somebody has gone from on-prem to cloud. We should try and avoid a lift and shift in a lot of cases as much as possible, at least, right? Because what happens is, let's say if you're running some workloads on-prem, and if you want to move to cloud comes with its own design patterns, its own architectural templates, and hence you literally cannot expect a magical surge in performance and reduction in cost, all of that, just because you lifted and shifted it. And hence, if you didn't do that, and if you really thought through your architecture and kind of did a proper migration, you probably will not run into problems as soon as you move to cloud itself, right? And hence, I would kind of flip that over and say that if you've decided to move the workloads back to on-prem, avoid a lift and shift as much as possible, because we're talking about different kinds of infrastructures, different kinds of setups, and hence a lot of times it might need its own kind of re-engineering. And hence that is one of the primary things that architects should keep in mind. The other is, are you building a portable solution? By portable solution, what I mean is containerization is probably one of the best things that has happened to engineers in the recent past. Basically, if I'm able to run my workloads on containers, and let's say I'm using some kind of an orchestration like Kubernetes, what it does is I'm able to fairly easily move my workloads from one environment to another environment. And hence, if I've given it some thought at the time of implementation and structured and designed it the right way, my workloads and my entire infra becomes that much more portable. And hence, if I have to now move from a cloud setup to an on-prem setup, I can now kind of bring up another container environment on my on-prem, and then the workload should be able to be ported onto my on-prem fairly easily, right? So I would kind of go back to the basics and look at the way I have designed my solution. Is it built for scale? Have I built it such that it's portable and is extendable? So those are some things that I would really keep in mind.
These were great, Pavan. So one, avoid the lift and shift of rehosting back, or the reverse rehosting, Brian. Avoid that. Actually spend some time thinking about re-engineering what the solution needs to be to run optimally on-prem, but also use that as an opportunity to maybe upgrade that solution, make it more portable, make it more flexible for future-proof it. Those are two great points. Philip, as you think about your clients and stuff, what do you see them having to go through to repatriate? What's it take? What's some of the best practices there?
I told you earlier, I have a lot of experience with migration projects.
Mm-hmm.
So repatriation is kind of a reverse migration.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the best practices of migration still apply with repatriation. And Pavan, thank you for reminding us. Pavan reminded us that there's work to repatriation. You got to plan, you have to try things, and so on. So, that's one of the myths of repatriation, is that we take what I call the data forklift, and we just pick up data off of one database management system, drop it on another, and it should automatically work. And it's amazing how often that does work, right? But most of the time, no. So you have to be careful with lift and shift. Let me come back to that, because I think another best practice of migration is, do not do migration as a big bang project. You need to break migration and repatriation into a series of accessible steps. Call them phases, whatever you want to call them. And so in the early phases, you want to do some exploratory things where you're testing whether the migration is even feasible. So in early phases of a repatriation or migration, you would lift and shift some data. You just, take data. In this case, we would take data that's been on the cloud and living there and has, gone through some development there, bringing it back to on-premises systems and just trying a few things. I realize that a lot of people say, I don't really have the people and the time for that. I think you should make the people and time for that. So lift and shift kind of has a place for kind of exploratory, introductory steps, but lift and shift usually is not alone. In other words, you shouldn't expect to merely do lift and shift. Once in a while, there's certain types of super raw data that a lot of AI actually works very well with, right? So for super raw data that needs to stay raw, because if you cleanse it and refactor it, you might actually lose some data points that the analytics needs to find, right? So in cases like that, lift and shift might be by itself, but usually a lift and shift is really for test purposes. And at some point, you sort of do your best to delete data that was lifted and shifting, and then start moving data that's been refactored for the next platform.
Yeah.
Thanks, Phil. Brian, would you add anything on this? What's it take?
Yeah, there's one big thing that I wanted to add as well, and that this is something that I was surprised by when we started looking at a couple jobs ago, doing something similar to this, is that application dependencies, right? When it comes time to move something from A to B, you might think, I've got my arms around it. I know what A is. It's this ball right here, and I'm going to bring it over and just put it on my target environment. And what you'll find out for workloads that have been in the cloud for any period of time, even if they were lifted and shifted, or there's been some development and tweaking over time, there's going to be some dependencies on other things, maybe in the cloud, maybe not, that you're not necessarily aware of. And you go ahead and you say, I know this is it. You bring it over, and then it breaks, right? Something's not connected. You either have a firewall in the way, or latency is blown up because now things are thousands of miles apart instead of feet apart in the AWS data center, or whatever the case may be. For any of my Linux peeps out there, if you run like netstat-a, you'll find some IP address and some port talking to some other IP address and port and going, what the heck is that, right? And do I need to worry about that? And if I'm going to move this workload, I need to make sure I understand everything that it touches and everything it talks to, because I might break it, even though I think I know what this entire ball of wax is. I really don't.
Break the actual app itself, or break the things that have over time connected to it.
Exactly. And introduce latencies that now all of a sudden bring your performance down, or like I said, maybe you have firewalls in place and they can't even talk to those components anymore.
Okay, so so far we've talked about what's it take to repatriate, the kind of being real intelligent about not just rehosting, but actually re-engineering, using a lift and shift only as a pilot, and to kind of get your arms around things, moving towards using the chance to become more portable, applying well-known migration best practices. It's just, we went, how to get from A to B? Well, then you could probably use those same lessons to go from B to C, or B back to A. We talked about focusing on application dependencies and making sure all the connections, see what else you might not, see what else you can avoid, breaking things that are connected to it, or breaking the app itself for hidden dependencies. Other things, what's it take? Pavan, you had any other ideas to add to that list of what it takes?
No, I'll probably go back to one of the points I was making earlier, right? In a lot of scenarios, what we're seeing is customers have moved their workloads to cloud and are slowly realizing that they are kind of getting into a vendor lock-in scenario, where some of the features on a particular hyperscaler, let's say, works well, but then with time, you're so getting into the weeds of things that a lot of your workloads are now running cloud native. And if you're not liking some of the features or some of the tools that you're using, either from a cost standpoint, from a feature standpoint, etc., you're so deep within the infrastructure that it's hard for you to come back. So another larger trend that we are seeing is customers are now proactively looking out for multi-cloud and hybrid cloud options. What that basically means is you're kind of hedging your bets. You don't want to get locked into one vendor, and hence the repatriation and kind of moving workloads from one particular cloud is giving them that option to keep that setup nimble as much as possible. And again, it kind of depends on the use case too, right? So my view on the larger point here is that have a holistic view of things. Understand that one size probably will never fit for all your use cases, and hence if you take your key metrics as a latency, a cost, data security, etc., understand which use cases would need that kind of infrastructure setup, and just plan your workloads accordingly. Some of them really don't have to be running on expensive hardware or the high-end compute, etc., that you would want to use on a cloud setup, right? Which is basically on cloud. Those can easily be moved to on-prem. So I think the larger point I'm trying to make is that take a holistic look and decide which of your workloads should run on cloud and which one should come back to on-prem.
Yeah, and Bob, I'd love to jump in
Yeah,
there.
please.
You bring up a great point, and we kind of, to the audience, before we got on live with you guys, we were talking a little bit about this. Back in the day, I was a DBA, and AWS RDS came along, and I was so happy, right? It gave me 10 weeks, 10 hours per week back, because I didn't have to do backups and patching and all that kind of stuff, right? So these PaaS services become really, really shiny, and they're hard to resist. And the more of those you consume, I call them the handcuffs when I was a Gartner, the handcuffs get tighter and tighter, and it's really, really hard to go and move from cloud vendor A to cloud vendor B or cloud vendor A back on-prem. How many of folks want to implement an AWS DynamoDB on-prem, right? No one wants to do that. That thing works great and it's not that expensive. Why would I move that? So I think to Pavan's point, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but kind of eyes wide open. Make sure you realize what you're consuming and what's going to be really hard to move back, because you're going to have to re-implement that in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it makes sense to leave this here because I don't have the time or resources to recreate this in an on-prem environment.
Mm-hmm.
Philip, how about you? Yeah, anything to add?
Yeah. We've been talking about a lot of technical challenges to repatriation, but sometimes it's the lawyers or the accountants who get in the way. And I've seen this with I've seen this for years with non-cloud migrations. I've also seen this with now cloud migrations and repatriation. So, for example, read the contract you've got with your cloud provider. Read it very carefully. Actually, don't read it. Get a lawyer to read it. And so here's the thing. And the accountants will want to see that contract too, because sometimes you will strike a multi-year contract with the cloud provider the same way you had multi-year contracts with a variety of applications and on-premises hardware vendors. So sometimes if you leave a platform, you still have to keep paying for it, even if you stop using it. See what I'm saying? So that's a contractual issue. The accountants are going to remind you of that. Also, some assets are set up for oh shoot, what's the word? They'll be taxed and charged, at a declining rate. What's the accounting?
Depreciation.
That's it. So you believe it or not, some of your depreciation for your cloud licenses may come to play. Sometimes people bring their own hardware with them to cloud, right? And you got to figure out, well, who actually owns that now? Does my cloud provider own that now, or can we get that back? So see what I'm saying? There's all these funky little details in the contract that are going to be there. And also, I think Pavan helped us to understand that there are costs for repatriation, that the payroll costs and the time of technical people is very much a cost. So keep that in mind. Also, if you go, if you're repatriating to an on-premises system, that system might have been designed for your needs 2 to 3 years ago when you migrated. It may not be up to what you're doing today. So you might actually need to do serious upgrades with both hardware and software licenses to even make on-premises viable for you. So that's a possibility. And then finally, when data changes hands, when applications change hands, there's always a political scuffle over who owns it now. And this is often I've seen so many organizations where, especially with data, they'll say, well, your data, you think it's your data, but it's in my storage space. So we think it's our data. So as you repatriate, you're rehosting data. So you gotta have that, uncomfortable conversation with people about data ownership. And then, of course, some cases, data might actually be governed differently on different platforms. And so you might have to revisit that during repatriation. See what I'm saying? There's all these nitpicky details that are part of it.
Right. I just was thinking, we went from the dulcet tones of Joni Mitchell to the gruff voice of Lauren Zevon. Send lawyers, guns, and money.
That's right. That's right.
Definitely, that's kind of crazy. Super, guys. We've been at this about 50 minutes. We've talked about all the factors from why people are considering repatriating. We've talked about the complexities involved, the people, the process, the technology, the planning. It's complicated. And I think what we've done today is, I think, give a lot of insight and information as to some of the factors you really need to consider, and people can now be proactive and intelligent in their strategy. Should there be the case where folks would like to get you guys as assistants more in doing in these kind of projects, I want to take a moment. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how best you'd like to interact with people should they want to follow up directly with you or your company. Why don't we start with you, Brian? How do you like to interact with folks?
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, first, let me tell you folks as well, if you're not familiar, right, Flexera is a vendor in the cloud cost optimization and ITAM and ITV spaces, if you will. So I don't want to come across as too much of a commercial, right? But we can help you with, kind of all things IT from a technology value optimization. Hey, how do I get the most value out of this stuff that I have? If that's of interest to you, obviously, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find. I'll be glad to. I might not be the guy, but I know a guy, right? And I can direct you in the right place.
Great, thanks, Brian. Pavan, how about you in Tredence?
Yeah, as I was saying earlier, Tredence is in the space of data science, AI, data engineering, consulting services. We offer advisory services. We do large migration projects. We do a ton of work now with a lot of Gen AI kicking in. Right, so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. More than happy to connect you with my leadership team or marketing team, and then we can take it from there.
Great, thank you, Pavan. Philip, how about you?
Yeah, I think the easiest way for people to find me is just go search for my name, Philip Russum, on LinkedIn, and you'll find me there, and my contact information is there as well. Also, if you're looking for a pianist, I have a YouTube channel as well. So you just go to youtube.com and you search for Philip Russum and you'll find my channel. Again, both of those have my contact information. I'm always happy to talk to people about pretty much anything.
Great. So favorite playlists, artists, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Now, I guess the question, do we know any good lawyers? Anyway, well, with that, I'll start to bring this to a close. Great conversation today, really relevant topic, an increasingly focused topic as companies are really rationalizing and growing their cloud architectures, their cloud use cases, their cloud applications, and sometimes they need to bring things back home, back to on-prem, repatriate. And we've talked about a lot of the factors that go into that decision, why you'd even need to do it in the first place, and if you're going to do it, what you need to think about. So I think we've provided some real useful information today, and I hope everyone uses it to be more successful as they go to market as they execute their strategies and succeed in their IT activities. All right, with that, I'm going to let everybody go. We'll see you next month. Let's see, what are we talking about next month? We're going to talk about Mind the Gap, where traditional data and analytics governance fails AI. So we're going to look at that gap in governance and see what we should be doing in support of AI type use cases. So look forward to that conversation as well. Okay, everyone. Thank you very much. See you next month.
Thanks, everybody.